there. So I'm hoping everyone can see my presentation. So it's just a quick introduction. So my name's Louise. I'm the outreach coordinator for Causeway, and we're one of the support providers. So we provide support to victims of modern slavery. So just following on from what Patrick and Craig have said, I'm going to really talk about what support in the NRM looks like, a bit more about the process, and then discussing the difference between modern slavery and human trafficking, and looking at spotting the signs of this. So just as a quick introduction of Causeway, we were previously known as City Hearts. So we were a charity founded in 2005, and we aimed to support women with life controlling issues. And this included addictions and eating disorders. It quickly progressed into supporting survivors of modern slavery, and our support and reach has really grown in the UK. This is now including criminal justice services also. In terms of modern slavery support, we currently provide services across the full of the North East, the North West, and South Yorkshire. So the impact that Causeway aim to provide is to be the bridge to lasting change for marginalised and vulnerable people. And at present, the main focus area is supporting survivors of modern slavery. And this is supporting them through the MSVCC contract. So just as a quick recap and introduction to what support is available and what the National Referral Mechanism is. The Modern Slavery Act itself outlines modern slavery as a term that includes any form of human trafficking, slavery, servitude, or forced labour. And the National Referral Mechanism, also known as the NRM, is the framework to identify and support the survivors of modern slavery, and to ensure that potential victims who are brought to the attention of authorities are referred to the NRM. So the NRM itself aims to ensure that victims are given all of the necessary support and assistance that they need in the period after they've been identified as a potential victim. And whilst a lot of individuals in the NRM have recently been saved from their exploitative situation, this can also include historic exploitation that's recently been brought to light. Some survivors who are in the NRM who've been referred on are often aware that they've been exploited or trafficked as well. So it might not always be the understanding that this was incorrect behaviour and that they were being exploited. And just quickly to clarify that when an NRM referral is submitted, the competent authority will review the referral and make the first reasonable grounds decision within 5 days. So I know this isn't a very appealing and nice way to look at the NRM, but it's quite a good way to understand the basics of what the NRM looks like and how people are supported whilst they're in this. So on the top left, we can see what Craig and Patrick discussed, and this is the referral stage. So this is if an individual is referred via the helpline or via an NRM first responder referral. If an individual is destitute, then an initial risk assessment would be complete, and an emergency safe house accommodation would be required and provided where possible. If an individual is not destitute, then within 5 days, a decision is made from the single competent authority. So the first decision that an individual will receive is called the reasonable grounds decision, and this is often referred to as either a positive or negative RG. So this decision means that the single competent authority suspect that there is reasonable grounds to believe that a person is a victim of trafficking. It will then be reviewed. So if a potential victim needs either accommodation in a safe house or outreach support in the community, this is what they will be referred to for their recovery and reflection period. So you might hear the terms recovery and reflection period quite often. I know the diagram does state this is 45 days, but this was recently changed to 30 days. And this is the time frame that gives a potential victim the time to support and recover from their experience, whilst deciding whether they want to work with authorities or work with the police relating to any criminal proceedings. And I will go through a little later what the support in this sort of time period looks like. Further on, once this decision's been made, a conclusive grounds decision is made. So this is known as a CG decision, and this is the final decision where authorities will look to decide if there is any conclusive grounds to confirm that an individual is a victim of modern slavery. So it is worth pointing out that whilst a CG decision is meant to be at around the 30-day time frame at the end of that recovery and reflection period. In reality, this is a really longer time than this. So a lot of our service users are supported for over a year, a couple of years before decisions are made. And so that is quite a long time frame that we support people whilst their referral and decisions being reviewed. And that decision's made from witness statements, support worker statements, and any other evidence or contributing factors that the competent authority have to rule whether this individual was a victim of modern slavery. So once a service user does get a positive conclusive grounds decision, they then are entitled to a statutory move-on period for 45 days. And if any other support's needed after these days, then we can complete a recovery needs assessment, and that allows us to request further time to support a survivor in their needs to recover. So just briefly to go over it, we did discuss safe house accommodation, and safe house accommodations offered individuals in the NRM who are destitute with no other housing options. So these are usually a shared property, and there's normally a designated team of advocates or support workers who can offer vital support to survivors to begin their recovery. The areas of support can include registering with a GP, accessing medical help or dental treatment, legal support or working with the police, opening bank accounts, and actually just understanding their statutory entitlements and what areas of support they need and are required to get help with. Advocates will really support service users through the NRM process, and they'll help explain each part of the decision-making process to make sure they understand, because it can be quite a complex process to be involved in. So in terms of the North East, Causeway have 2 safe houses. So one's a 12-bed space mixed house, and this is for low-need single people, couples, or families with children. And the other house that we have is a male Vietnamese house. And this is the first safe house to be introduced that's culture specific. And that was because Vietnamese individuals tend to have quite a high absconsion rate. So this was trialled for a year in conjunction with the Salvation Army, and it's really positively worked. It's reduced absconsion and helped survivors engage with the police. And we believe that that is through giving males in that house sort of that community living and living with others of a similar nationality. We do also cover South Yorkshire, so we have 5 safe houses there, and in the northwest of England, there's 8 safe houses. The other form of support you might be offered if you were in the NRM would be outreach support. So that's for individuals who don't need safe house accommodation. And this example could be if someone was in local authority housing, living with family or friends, or if they were asylum seekers, potentially in NAS accommodation. So outreach support is a team of advocates who work in the community to meet recovery needs, and this can be through regular telephone and face-to-face visits to any service users that they support. So we work with survivors in a way to really ensure that they can access services in their community and promote their independence. So I'm the coordinator of the North East Outreach team, and at present we have over 100 service users in the North East area, and we cover from Middlesbrough up to Berwick and right along to Carlisle, so we cover quite a big geographical area. And then Causeway also have 4 outreach teams in the northwest of England and 1 in South Yorkshire. So when we talk about the NRM and support, in terms of how Causeway are instructed, is as Patrick and Craig said, the Salvation Army subcontract the support out to various support providers. And this contract that we all work under is called the Modern Slavery Victim Care Contract. So the Salvation Army subcontract us as one of their support providers. And this contract is really in place to ensure that survivors get support to meet their recovery needs. And we make sure that we do this immediately and provide longer term support if possible. The support that we provide is based on what is named ECAT entitlements, and these outline the areas of support that the government are legally obliged to find and give. So ECAT entitlements are found under international law, and this is found under Article 12 of the Council of Europe Convention on Action Against Trafficking in Human Beings. And all different elements of support and in the entitlements ensure that recovery and reflection period really meets any physical, psychological, or social recovery needs. So just as a bit of a breakdown of the ECAT entitlement of what the MSVCC contract ensures victims and survivors receive is safe accommodation. If a service user is not English or English is not their first language, translation services will be provided for any appointments that they may need that for. Financial support is given weekly, and this is a recovery rate to help all survivors and access and support to aim to make them more independent in the community. Medical support, so that might be registered with a GP, sexual health checks, completing any HC2 certificates. And if it's deemed beneficial for their recovery, we can also provide private counselling. So that's to ensure that survivors get urgent support to deal with the trauma they've been subject to really help them reflect and recover from what they've been through. We also make sure that we'll signpost to legal advice and community services, alongside registering any dependents in school and really helping the people we work with plan for the future. Once the recovery and reflection period is complete and that conclusive grounds decision is made, individuals are then entitled to a 45-day statutory period called move-on support. So this is given to a survivor to really give them time to adjust, and it gives us time as well to complete a recovery needs assessment. So that recovery needs assessment lets us look to see if there's any ongoing recovery needs that might still need support. If there is outstanding needs, that means it gives us time to go back to the Home Office and request longer to support an individual. Or if not, it gives us 45 days to work with survivors and plan their exit from our service. So to ensure that they're aware of community support available and really have time to aid any transition to being fully independent. I'll just quickly touch on Lifeline as well, which is another dedicated move-on support programme. So this means that when someone comes to the end of their move-on period, it's a safety net for someone to contact for advice. And it was introduced after seeing that our service users struggled after being used to support for such a long time. They felt very overwhelmed when this stopped. So this looks like regular phone calls and drop-in sessions and making sure that there's a dedicated team of staff to support all survivors who've left the NRM and our support with specific issues such as mental health support, homelessness or addictions. And we found that this continued support works really well. It just helps with independence, empowerment, and it really builds resilience. And we hope that this can prevent any future exploitation. So one of the main questions that people tend to ask is, what is the difference between modern slavery and human trafficking? So in terms of modern slavery is defined as the illegal exploitation of people for personal or commercial gain. And quite often people will use terms modern slavery or human trafficking very interchangeably. The main difference is that modern slavery is the umbrella term, so that's the main term which covers all these different human rights issues relating to exploitation, and human trafficking is one of these. Modern slavery itself encompasses slavery, servitude, and forced compulsory labour. So as human trafficking is very prevalent and something that is very prevalent in the NRM, I think it's important to have a very good understanding of what human trafficking actually is. And this is defined by the United Nations as the recruitment, transportation, transfer, harbouring or receipt of a person, and that's by means of threat, the use of force, coercion or deception. And this is done so one person has control over another for the purpose of exploitation. So for a person to be trafficked, there normally has to be the three core elements that have taken place to make that a victim of human trafficking. So the first is act. So this is when you think of a trafficker either recruiting or transporting or transferring people or one single person. And I think people commonly think that this means transporting people across borders, but this can be in the same city, the same housing estate. It's anything relating to moving an individual around for the purpose of exploitation. The second is means. So this refers to one or more methods that someone may use to exploit an individual. So examples of this could be sort of threats, fraud, deception, or use of force. And then the final is purpose. So this means that if the other two elements, so if the act of recruiting or transporting someone alongside the way they've done this, which could be threats or deception, is all done in the aim of exploiting someone, then this means that this is human trafficking. So when all three of them elements meet, this shows that this is a victim of human trafficking. And traffickers use whatever means they can to coerce or deceive individuals into abuse or servitude. In terms of the actual exploitation itself, there's four prevalent forms of exploitation, and they are labour exploitation, sexual, domestic servitude, and criminal exploitation. Whilst we say this is the most prevalent, it's really hard to determine. I know a lot of people have discussed this earlier because a lot of victims are either unknown or unwilling to cooperate, but it's estimated that across the world, 40.3 million people are currently today victims of modern slavery. So I'll quickly go through a little bit about the different forms of exploitation and just how to spot the signs of these. So in terms of exploitation in general, there is some common signs that can indicate an individual is being exploited, and this is not specific to a certain type of exploitation. And so some of the questions that you can really ask yourself if you have concerns or anything that's ringing alarm bells that someone could be involved in modern slavery are, is this person acting like they are being forced or being forced to complete an activity against their will? Is there a severe fear or a distrust in authorities? Have they advised that any threats have been made to them or their families? Do they seem like they constantly work and state this is because they have debts to an employer or are regular deductions taken from their salary? Is there any signs of physical or psychological abuse, or perhaps any changes in contact, so little or no contact with any support network of family or friends? In terms of different areas of exploitation, one of the most prevalent forms that we see is labour exploitation. And so labour exploitation is defined as when an individual is coerced or forced to work for little or no financial gain. And this can often be under the threat of punishment. Whilst there's lots of ways individuals can be coerced into labour exploitation, this can really include physical violence or threats of violence or intimidation, fake promises. So that could be the promise of you're going to get paid loads of money if you prove you're good at your job, or that money's tight at the moment, you will get extra pay in the future. It can also be removal of identity documents or papers. And quite often, if it's an individual who has no immigration status allowing them to live in the UK, it can also be the threat of being exposed to immigration authorities too, and really instilling that fear that they must continue in their exploitative situation and continue working, otherwise that there would be repercussions. And whilst this can happen everywhere, the prevalent industries that it does occur in are often car washes, nail bars, or construction sites. So in terms of spotting the signs if someone was being exploited for labour, it is very difficult to tell, but there is these sort of questions that you can ask yourself to help spot the signs if you do have concerns. So is someone showing common signs of abuse? Do they appear to be frightened or withdrawn? Do they always appear to be accompanied by others or seem like their movement is restricted on entering and leaving different premises? Is their employer providing their accommodation? So they actually having to live in very overcrowded and unsafe accommodation as part of their role? Do they seem like they're given false information? So does it seem that they don't know their personal details or they're scared to share their personal details? And do they actually have the basic training to safely complete their role? Do they have the right equipment and clothing to do that role to keep them safe? Sexual exploitation is when an individual is deceived, forced, or coerced into taking part in sexual activities or providing sexual services. And anyone can be a victim of sexual exploitation. This can be a situation between two individuals or on a large organised crime scale. Sexual exploitation can often be referred to as sex trafficking, and that's the illegal trafficking of humans for the purpose solely of sexual exploitation. In terms of spotting the signs, it is obviously very difficult, but the main signs would be if someone does state this is against their will, If a sex worker is being subject to trafficking, they may have little or no access to any earnings. This may all go to their trafficker. Is there any information given from someone or any observations that you can see that looks like someone's been intimidated or they're being forced to provide sexual services? Is there any signs of physical abuse? This could be things like cigarette burns on arms or legs, or tattoos that indicate ownership by whoever's organising the crime. Is someone arranging work for them and helping them travel between appointments? It's really obviously difficult to see, but these are some of the signs that you can see that would hint towards a sexual exploitative situation. I will briefly just touch on domestic servitude, and that's when an individual is working and often living with their employer's home to complete a variety of tasks. And this can often become exploitation if they're forced to work long hours for little money, their movements being restricted, or they're being ill-treated, such as physical abuse. And whilst it's hard to identify as it happens in private households, there can be admissions of exploitation from a victim or a third party. And some of the questions you can ask yourself is, does that person ever leave their place of work? Are their working hours excessive with a large amount of work? Do they appear that they're malnourished or tired or withdrawn? Or is there any indicators of abuse, such as threats, violence, or abuse? And finally, just to finally touch on criminal exploitation, similarly to what was discussed earlier, criminal exploitation is being deceived, forced, or coerced into illegal criminal activity. And this can be through areas such as cannabis cultivation, drug distribution, forced begging, or benefit fraud. And this can be really highly documented in stuff like county lines at the moment. That's in the news, and that shows the significant impact of this and how this is a new form of criminal exploitation, which is highly on the rise. It's really difficult to spot the signs of this type of exploitation, and unfortunately, sometimes it's only apparent when the criminal justice system's involved. But common signs could be if an individual's moved daily to different locations, return at the same place each evening together, or just a lack of understand that this is illegal activity they are working in. So I know that was a very whistle-stop tour and I've talked quite a bit, but if there is any questions, please just raise them by the Microsoft form in the chat. And I'll pass you over to Gemma from Bernardo's. Thank you.